Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. On February 15, 1898, at 9:40 in the evening, the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, killing 266 American sailors. Most were sleeping. Most never had a chance. And here's what fascinates me about this moment. We still don't know what really happened. Not with certainty, not after 4 major investigations spanning a century, but that uncertainty didn't stop this explosion from launching a war, creating an empire, and establishing a pattern of American behavior that echoes through everything from the Gulf of Tonkin to weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Understanding what happened that night requires holding multiple truths. The explosion was real, the deaths were real, the grief was real, and the way America responded to that grief changed the course of history in ways that had almost nothing to do with what actually caused the blast. Picture this: Havana Harbor on a humid February night. The Maine sits at anchor, a 6,682-ton symbol of American naval power sent to Cuba ostensibly on a friendly visit to protect American citizens during the Cuban Revolution against Spain. But everyone knows the real message. We're watching you. Captain Charles Sigsbee is in his cabin writing correspondence. The officer of the deck, Lieutenant John Blandon, makes his rounds on what he'll later describe as an eerily quiet night. Some of the crew were singing on deck, he'd recall. It was dark, overcast, and threatening to rain. Most of the crew, 290 enlisted men and 39 Marines, are in their bunks in the forward section of the ship. In the enlisted quarters where sailors sleep stacked in hammocks, dreaming of home, of their next port call, of anything but what's about to happen. The ship had been scheduled to leave for New Orleans the next day for Mardi Gras. President McKinley hoped that by then the anti-Spain fever gripping the nation would have cooled down. He was trying to avoid a war. Then at 9:40, the world rips apart. Captain Sigsbee hears what he thinks is a rifle shot. Then, seconds later, a sound beyond description, a massive explosion that tears through the forward third of the ship. The blast is so powerful it breaks windows in Havana and shakes the city to its core. More than 5 tons of powder charges for the 6 and 10-inch guns detonate in a chain reaction. The forward section of the Maine, the section where the enlisted men sleep, simply ceases to exist. Fire erupts across the sinking vessel. Ordnance continues to explode. Men scramble through smoke-filled corridors, confused, disoriented, looking for ladders, for hatches, for any way out. The lights are gone. The corridors fill with water and debris. Some make it to the deck. Most don't. The Maine settles to the bottom of the harbor within minutes. The twisted metal of what was once a proud warship, now a tomb for 266 men. Think about what that means. In less than 10 minutes, more American sailors died than in any naval disaster in U.S. history up to that point. This record would stand until Pearl Harbor, 43 years later. 2 officers, 251 enlisted sailors and Marines. Most were sleeping when it happened. Most never woke up. Now let me build the clock for you, because what happened next reveals something profound about how media, grief, and national ambition can combine into something unstoppable. Two newspaper publishers in New York, William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, had been locked in a vicious circulation war for years. This wasn't genteel competition. These men hated each other. Hearst had bought the New York Journal in 1895 specifically to destroy Pulitzer's New York World. He'd even stolen Pulitzer's star cartoonist and the popular Yellow Kid comic strip, which is where the term yellow journalism comes from. They'd both been covering the Cuban Revolution with increasingly sensational stories, each trying to outrage the other. Spanish atrocities, some real, some exaggerated, some completely fabricated. Cuban heroism, American citizens in danger. Every day, both papers pushed the narrative that Spain was brutal, that Cuba needed liberation, that America had a moral obligation to intervene. Hearst had sent reporters and illustrators to Cuba. One of them, the famous artist Frederick Remington, had supposedly telegraphed back, "Everything is quiet. There is no trouble here. There will be no war. I wish to return." According to one account, Hearst replied, "Please remain. You furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war." Whether that exchange actually happened is disputed. Hearst denied it, and no evidence of the telegrams has ever been found. But here's what matters. It was entirely believable, because that's exactly what Hearst was trying to do. He wanted a war, not because he was evil, but because war sold newspapers. And selling newspapers was how you won. When news of the Maine explosion reached New York, Hearst reportedly told his editors, "This means war." And he was right. On February 17th, 2 days after the explosion, Hearst's New York Journal ran the headline, "Destruction of the War." Ship Maine was the work of an enemy. Not might have been, not possibly, was stated as fact. The subheadline read, "Torpedo Hole, discovered by government divers in the Maine." This was a lie. No government divers had discovered any such thing. The Navy's investigation had barely begun. Pulitzer's New York World asked in massive type, "Maine explosion caused by bomb or torpedo." They offered a $50,000 reward. Think about that number in 1898 dollars, equivalent to well over $1 million today, for solving the mystery. But the headlines made clear who they thought was guilty: Spain. Both papers published what they called a suppressed cable, from Captain Sigsbee to the Navy Secretary, saying the explosion was not accidental. The cable was fake, completely fabricated. But it sold papers, lots of papers. Here's where it gets complicated, and this is the part that troubles me. More sober newspapers, Harper's Weekly, the New York Times, the New York Tribune, urged caution. Wait for the investigation, they said. Don't jump to conclusions. Harper's Weekly wrote that the fate of the Maine will continue an unsolved mystery for historians to wrangle over. Even some of Pulitzer's own editorials admitted nobody outside a lunatic asylum would think Spain stupid enough to attack an American warship in their own harbor while trying to avoid war. But those voices got drowned out by something more powerful: grief, looking for someone to blame, combined with media that profited from outrage, wrapped in a nation hungry to prove itself on the world stage. America in 1898 was an emerging power, but not yet a global one. We'd finished conquering our own continent. Now what? Many Americans saw European colonial powers controlling territories around the world and wondered, why not us? The Maine gave them their answer. Or rather, the story about the Maine gave them their answer. The Naval Court of Inquiry concluded in March that an external mine had caused the explosion. They couldn't say who planted it. They didn't have to. The damage was done. "Remember the Maine. To hell with Spain," became the rallying cry. By April, President McKinley, who never read Hearst's journal, had been pushed into declaring war. Here's what the evidence actually tells us. A century later, in 1974, Admiral Hyman Rickover commissioned a private investigation. They studied archives, official reports, wreckage photographs. They compared the Maine explosion to similar incidents on other ships. Their conclusion? The source of the blast likely originated from within the vessel, probably from bituminous coal in a bunker that released fire damp. A mixture of flammable gases, which ignited the ammunition magazine next to it. A tragic accident. In 1998, National Geographic used computer simulations and modern forensic techniques. They reached similar conclusions. No external mine, no Spanish sabotage, just a design flaw that put a coal bunker too close to an ammunition magazine, combined with the volatile nature of bituminous coal. Both things are true. America went to war over something that probably never happened, and that war turned the United States into a global empire. I find myself thinking about those 266 sailors. Most were young men from working-class families. They didn't wake up that morning thinking they'd become the pretext for American expansion into Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. They were just doing their jobs, and then they were dead, and then their deaths were used to justify a war that might have happened anyway, but now had the perfect emotional catalyst. Think about the position President McKinley was in. He knew the evidence was ambiguous. He knew the yellow press was manufacturing outrage, but he also knew that 266 Americans were dead, that the country was demanding action, and that powerful voices were telling him this was America's moment to step onto the world stage. How do you resist that? How do you tell grieving families to wait, to be patient, to let cooler heads prevail when newspapers are screaming for vengeance every single day? We're still living with the consequences. The Spanish-American War lasted less than 4 months. Secretary of State John Hay called it a splendid little war, but it fundamentally transformed American foreign policy. Suddenly we had territories in the Caribbean and the Pacific. Suddenly we were an imperial power, whether we called it that or not. The war in the Philippines to suppress independence movements there lasted years and cost thousands of lives. And the pattern established in 1898, the way grief and media sensationalism and national ambition can combine to create unstoppable momentum toward conflict, that pattern keeps repeating. The Gulf of Tonkin. Incident in 1964. The certainty about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq in 2003. Each time we're told we can't afford to wait. Each time we're told the evidence is clear. Each time we learn later that the story was more complicated than the headline suggested. This isn't to say that all of these conflicts were identical or equally unjustified. It's to say that the human tendency to want simple answers to complicated questions, to seek someone to blame when tragedy strikes, to let emotion override evidence, that tendency is constant, and it can be weaponized by those who profit from conflict, whether that's newspaper publishers selling papers or politicians selling wars. The philosopher William James, writing just a few years after the Maine explosion, argued that truth is what works, what proves itself in practice. But what happened in 1898 shows us something darker. Sometimes a lie can work just as well as the truth, at least in the short term. The lie that Spain destroyed the Maine worked well enough to launch a war and an empire. The truth, that it was probably an accident, took decades to emerge, and by then had become just a footnote. Both things are true. The explosion happened, and the story we told ourselves about the explosion mattered more than what actually caused it. I respect every person for who they are, including those newspaper publishers and politicians in 1898. They weren't cartoon villains. Hearst and Pulitzer genuinely believed they were serving the public interest by exposing Spanish atrocities in Cuba, many of which were real. McKinley genuinely wrestled with the decision to go to war. The sailors who died genuinely gave their lives in service to their country, even if the circumstances of their deaths were misunderstood and misused. All of these things are true, and acknowledging that complexity doesn't diminish the tragedy. It makes it more human, more recognizable, more relevant to the choices we face when the next crisis hits and the headlines start screaming and someone tells us we can't afford to wait for the full story. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, ask yourself, when was the last time you waited for the full story before forming an opinion? When was the last time you questioned a narrative that confirmed what you already wanted to believe? When was the last time you chose complexity over certainty? Because that's what the Maine teaches us, not just about yellow journalism or American imperialism, but about the eternal human tendency to let emotion trump evidence when the stakes feel high and someone tells us we need to act now. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, then please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.